Hey listeners, it's Peter. The podcast is almost 2 years old. It's incredible to think how far we've come with 35 episodes so far. And to close off the year, I thought we'd do something special this time. So sit back and enjoy a very different take on the Grand Challenges podcast.
I'm so happy that I'm now on this side of the table.
Okay, Peter, tables have turned.
Indeed.
I get to be the one asking questions.
Okay, Peter, now I interview you.
My guests love this.
It's come to this.
I noticed that nobody else was throwing your own questions back at you.
Because you make it very hard on us as podcastees. So now I think we should make it hard on you as a podcaster.
All right, so Peter, you've asked me lots of questions over the last hour or so. So now it's time for me to turn the spotlight on you.
I have a good question.
Okay. Bring it on.
Maybe this is a question for a beer afterwards.
I'm your host, Peter Marcus Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to tackle the global challenges that our world is facing in their own unique ways. You've heard their stories, you've followed the fun banters and jokes, but today we are doing something different in this special episode of the podcast. It is time for my guests to turn the tables on me with their own curious questions. So sit back and enjoy as I reflect on the podcast and its origin story, my own career decisions, and attempt to answer my own questions thrown back at me. Please enjoy. Welcome to the show, and thank you always for your support, listeners. It's been 2 years, and I must say it's been an incredible journey. I've received incredible feedback from all of you, and I'm glad just to know that the stories with my guests that we've been putting out there to the world have been well received and enjoyed across the globe. I remember 2.5 years ago, I began thinking about doing a podcast. Well, actually, the thought has been with me for even longer, but I took action 2.5 years ago, and I had to learn how to produce it from scratch. The softwares, the recording, the audio, especially the audio, which gave me a lot of headaches at times, but just trying to learn the fundamentals so that you can get it right, or as right as you can get it from the get-go. This episode is quite special. What was never really mentioned in any of the shows was that once I concluded the interview with my guests, they got to ask me a question of their choosing. And the idea was to compile these questions into a single special episode where you can then learn a bit more about what drives me, some quirky things about me, even about the podcast itself, plans that I may have in future for the show, and just general philosophies I have in life, in work, in how I approach things. And so this is the first of hopefully several. Do let me know what you think about the episode, and I will keep producing them. We will be featuring questions from guests across the entire series so far. I've compiled 22 questions, and actually they focus a lot on 2 main topics. The first being primarily about the podcast, and the second one more about life, career choices, and perceptions in general. And I will walk you through these questions bit by bit, and I hope you enjoy learning a bit more about me in the process. So thanks again for sticking around, and without further ado, let's get into it. The first question is from Janine Bolliger, who was our guest on episode 14, and we spoke about biodiversity. But she had a particular curiosity for me.
So Peter, one question for you. Why are you doing these podcasts?
Interesting question. Yeah, some background, I guess. I had the fortunate chance of really doing interviews as part of a research technique back in 2017. And this work has yet to see the light of day because it's a lot of data. But when I was doing the interview process with people, I really enjoyed it, for one. But I think mostly because it felt like you could make a connection with the person that you were talking on the opposite end of the table. And I believe that everyone has a story to tell. And it's a story of their journey, and a journey that also can result in a lot of learnings for people, whether it's from a scientific perspective or a more life journey perspective. And I think giving people a chance or a platform to share it. We see lots of science podcasts. We see some researchers embark on this, but we don't see this often enough, especially in our field. And I think it's an opportunity I wanted to seize. I enjoy communication, and I look forward to, in a way, connecting the dots with people together and allowing them to have a platform to, bring their messages out to the world. And if even just one person, I think, can benefit from the episode and learn something, then I feel like I've achieved the goal. And so 2017, That was when I had the idea, when I did my interviews. And I said last year when I started preparing for it, I said, now is the time. And yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. It actually took me 6 months to learn all the skills that I needed to start producing podcast episodes. And I actually recorded the first 5 episodes in the 6 months leading up to the release of the first episode. So I made sure I took some time to prepare, to learn, and to be ready. Manuel Fischer from episode 26 had a similar question, but it related a lot more to a concept we discussed on his episode, which was the Ivory Tower, which is a very common concept referred to in academia. The critique that academics tend to do their work in isolation of practice and often hide in this so-called figurative tower.
I think having a podcast as you're doing is one way of getting out of the Ivory Tower. What motivates you to do that on a personal level, independently of the Ivory Tower in the system that you're...
A very interesting question, actually. I think the key is I've always been a very creative person. I like to bring creative elements to my work, whether it's, in the academic sense, PowerPoint presentations, the way I stylize my slides or the diagrams I do. I like to experiment with different kinds of softwares. And I think the biggest motivation for doing the podcast, maybe twofold, you could say. I guess the first stemmed from my first foray into social science, where I was doing semi-structured interviews. And when I could see the magic that emerges in the connection you have with the person you're talking about, that is so incredibly exciting for me. And it just gives me this beautiful feeling of connection. And I think the second aspect is, I think we need to communicate the science in an accessible way. We need to be able to go deep into issues in a form of media that I think people can access and people want to listen to, whether it's cooking dinner at night, which apparently a lot of my guests listen and proof check the episodes while cooking, or whether it's just traveling. And I think it's another way of making, this different research topics and drawing links between them and also showing the human connection and the stories people have to tell, which everyone, I believe, does, to the world. So, yeah, those are, I guess, the main motivations.
Thanks for that.
I think what I noticed in most recent episodes of the show is that people are becoming aware that the world is becoming more polarized. And I think we need a good story every now and then for people to be able to reflect upon their own journeys. And this is something that I really felt back in 2017 with the interviews. And I'm feeling now through the 35 episodes we've produced so far on the show. So if I can, motivate people to open up and to tell their story and then to be able to produce that in a way that makes them proud, it gives me a lot of satisfaction of, in a way, having done my part for the world. So yeah, communicating the science in an accessible way and giving people something to, I guess, think about, to laugh about, but also think about. So moving on, our very first guest on the show also had a question related to the podcast.
So Peter, you are starting the podcast with this episode, and I wish you all the success into the future.
Yeah, thank you.
How many years do you expect to run the podcast?
That's a very interesting question. I guess I haven't set a time limit on it, but yeah, I'll certainly, I guess, see how it goes. And as long as I keep enjoying doing it, I will keep doing it. I guess the key for me is I want to try and be consistent in how I release the podcast and how I produce the podcast. And I want to make sure that I maintain the quality, if not improve the quality. So hopefully for many, many, many years to come. But who knows? Time will tell.
Good. So good luck.
Thank you. Ivory Tower was my very first guest on the show. And we actually did a trial recording a year prior to when I recorded this episode, because I needed to do some experiments to see what this show was going to be about. And I'm very thankful to you, Joao, if you're listening in, for all the support you've given me in kickstarting this show, because it gave me, a better sense of confidence and a better sense of how to bring people's stories to the listeners. So yes, as I said in my answer, I hope to keep it going for as many years as possible. I don't see myself stopping this anytime soon. And yeah, with the enjoyment that I get producing each and every episode and connecting with new people on a day-to-day basis, I will keep pursuing this for the foreseeable future. Moving on, Martin Kuller from episode 3. I had a pretty funny question, which I didn't think about, but could be an addition to the show. Listen in.
Are you already recording?
Yeah, it's been running.
Is this going into the blooper section?
I don't know yet. There are some funny
Are you
bloopers.
going to have a blooper section? Oh, maybe this is the question I can ask. Okay, I have a question. Are you going to have a blooper section?
A blooper section.
Because I want to hear that.
You want to hear a blooper section?
Yes.
I'll think about it. I need to see if all my guests are happy with that. But yeah.
I'm sure they made many bloopers.
No, definitely.
I'm sure you made many bloopers.
No, me especially. And I guess that's something for the future for people to find out. But no, I certainly have. Yeah, factually incorrect bloopers, complete blanks. I think some people call it brain farts. And
what's the biggest brain fart you had during a podcast?
I guess it's when I literally mistook Mount Etna for Vesuvius. And this is Mount Etna that flattened Pompeii several centuries ago.
No, that's Vesuvio.
Oh, sorry. Whoops. Yeah. I'm going to cut that out. Don't worry. Why do I think it was Pompeii? Anyways.
Well, why not? It's still a volcano in Italy.
Anyways. Okay, keep going.
That's not too bad. They're both in Italy. They're both volcanoes.
Yeah. But yeah, they flattened the wrong city.
True.
Yeah. In case you're curious, that blooper came from episode 4 with Sofia Borino, where we spoke about urban soundscapes. Editing the episodes is my way of assuring my guests that they can have a relaxed atmosphere when we do the actual interview. So often the bloopers are cut out, but they do give us a good laugh every now and then. So it's always nice to go back to them and to just see what went wrong, what was misquoted, what was butchered, what was said in an awkward way, how many repeats we had to do of final messages, as well as any other kinds of answers to the questions. So at some point, I will definitely feature snippets of them, as long as my guests are comfortable with them. But do stay tuned for them in future, especially in special episodes like these, where they are ideally suited for a nice laugh and reflective time. In terms of plans for the podcast, we've also had questions around who I would like to have on the show. And this question has actually been asked in different versions several times. For one, by Fritz Kleinschrott from episode 18, Abhishek Narayan from episode 7, and Veljko Prodanovic from episode 13.
So, yeah, I mean, you put a lot of effort in this podcast, which is amazing. And it's great that you give me and many others the chance to express ourselves. But if you had the full choice of people to sit here and to be interviewed, like, who would you choose?
Okay, Peter, tables have turned.
Indeed.
I get to be the one asking questions. So, I have not one, but 3 questions for you.
Jeez.
So, who is your dream podcast guest?
Who is my dream podcast guest?
If you could get one person to come and sit here and talk about grand challenges, who would that be?
It's a really tricky question because we don't just face one grand challenge. And I guess there'll be an aspirational list that I would love to have. And maybe I guess I'm working towards that. Who knows? Let's see where this podcast goes in the future.
Yeah.
But I mean, certainly, first and foremost, I think everyone is standing up to these challenges in their own unique ways. And I think you can learn so much from someone with only a few years of experience, and you can learn just as much from someone who has had 20, 30 years of experience. And I think what my motivation with this podcast was to really unravel these nuggets or these gems of wisdoms across the different generations, the genders, and every other possibility. So I don't know if I would have an ideal guest, but I would certainly at some point would love to have people who have really been at the forefront of the NGO space, the political space, that really have inspiring ideas and are, I guess, doing philanthropic work to help bring these ideas to light, to engage the knowledge sectors. So if I had to name one person, I mean, Bill Gates would be an interesting guest to have on the show. And, you know, apart from that, I think if we look at some of the work that big organizations are doing, in my space in particular, if we think of nature-based solutions, the IUCN, to have some people there, advocates for countries or that represent their countries. Yeah, so I gave you one name, but I think there's certainly a lot of people with a story that can, if we combine all these stories together, might reveal something about how we may tackle these challenges.
Fantastic.
And it's not just one name. There are so many guests that I would aspire to interview on the show at some point. But I guess you have to start small. You got to work your way up. And over the last 2 years, we've had some incredible people on the show that have had incredible careers and have made significant impacts. But we've also had a lot of people who are just starting out with their careers and who have already experienced so many invaluable things that young people, whether it's research, architecture, or any other kind of discipline, can learn from. So I think there's no rush. Definitely would love to have these people on the show at some point, but let's see. Listeners, if you have a contact, do let me know. It would be great to, I guess, make that contact through, I don't know how many degrees of separation. They say 6 degrees of separation is the average. Maybe that's becoming smaller nowadays, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing who will come on the show. And even though I do plan out names and guests that I would like to have on the show, every now and then someone comes along who just completely blows me away when I least expect it. So yeah, let's keep it a surprise. Abhishek asked me more than one question, and don't worry, you'll hear his other questions in due course. So stay tuned. Velko's question was quite similar, but also a bit broader.
Okay, Peter. Now I interview you.
My guests love this.
It's come to this. So you're doing this for a while now. By the time this episode comes, you'll be doing it for a couple of months now. So let's say if you have a time machine and you can go back wherever you want, or in the future as well, in the past or in the future, who or what, because we're talking about AI now as well, who or what would be something you want to spend a day with, professionally speaking? What is something that would be like fascinating to you to speak or just be next to someone for 24 hours?
Whoa, that's an interesting one. If I could go back or forward, I guess forward's a bit more difficult because unless I go forward to meet my future self and spend the day with my future self, but that would be cheating in life. I kind of want to experience the, what life would throw at me rather than have it spoiled. It's like watching a long series. But so I guess it would be probably going back in time.
You can also do fictional characters if you want. So especially around the future, if you consider all the sci-fi fictional things and things that we assume the future will be.
Yeah. Are you trying to push me towards Master Yoda?
I mean, not necessarily, but if you like that.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
All right. I'll have a think. This question stumped me a lot because when you think about it, the options are endless. Past, present, future, fictional, AI. But I guess there's many ways I can answer this. And I guess first off, I'd be curious to interview myself from, say, 10 years ago to see how I thought back then. I learned a lot in the last 10 years, and I think it's nice to reflect and to see how, little I knew, or at least how differently I thought. So going back to my past self, I think would be an interesting one. And I guess the exercise of writing yourself a letter to your past self is similar to this. But I guess in this case, it would be in podcast form. In terms of people from the past, famous people like inventors and scientists, I'm thinking Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, they would be the usual suspects, but that would be a very cliche answer. And I guess that's what biographies are also there for. If you read different versions of the same person's biography, you start to understand different perspectives of how this person thought and how they led their lives. So not an exciting answer to give, but I think that's where we look into the future. Now, here I have, I guess, perhaps even less of a clue because we have so much uncertainty. And like I mentioned, I wouldn't actually want to talk to my future self. I'd rather be surprised. But with the emergence of AI, it would be interesting to see what a conversation with an AI chatbot might look like. So who knows? Maybe an idea for the show. I guess time will tell. The last point, fictional characters. I mean, I watch a few series, but I don't read enough fiction to have a favorite character. So I guess once the answer comes to mind, you'll hear it here. My conversation with Matt Santamuris on episode 16 was incredibly eye-opening, and we got to learn a lot about the real challenges we're facing with trying to adapt to climate change and urban heat. But his question was also quite insightful and was about the podcast.
I suppose that through, the different interviews you have in the podcast with different people, you get different, opinions, perhaps different principles, different pathways, different objectives. The main question is, how really all these opinions affects and impact your thinking and your way of thinking and your, let's say, principles. And if really all these discussions really have an impact on the way you are really shape your life.
That's a really interesting question of reflection as well for being able to do this podcast, and I guess what I also get out of it. I guess the first thing that it sort of gives me is a sense of confirmation that some of the thoughts I've had, some of the values I had are also shared among many people. I mean, the most obvious one I think is, no solution can be solved in isolation. You need that, that interdisciplinary approach. And that's more from a technical side. But I think when we dive down into the personal level, I find everyone has gone through their own fair share of challenges. And usually life shows you a path. I think there's a certain path that becomes very clear. Either it's through a very strong mentor, either it's through a very strong opportunity or a serious event in the world. And, hearing these examples in a way gives me hope, gives me, I guess, the drive or the energy to go forward and to face life and to say, hey, throw whatever you have at me. I know there's a pathway and I'm curious to see how to proceed along this pathway. And so I think having that confirmation that you're not alone in your journey, whether it's an academic that I'm interviewing or an architect or, someone else, I find it just very comforting and reassuring. Absolutely. And then, of course, these little tips that you can take with you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
I understand.
Thank you for the question. Similarly, Shabar Ali from episode 25 came with a question that allowed me to reflect on the podcast as a whole and to see how that has affected me as well.
Okay, so here's my question for you. And I know I went over a number of different things in the talk, including some things that are somewhat pessimistic, some things that are optimistic. But given you've talked to a number of amazing people on the podcast, obviously the episodes from before, and I assume you'll have many amazing guests after me, and so I'm just more the outlier. What gives you the most hope in everything you're hearing and everything you're doing? Yeah, what gives you the most hope?
That's a very interesting question. I think from the diverse guests that I've interviewed and also the diverse network of people I interact with, I think the one thing that does give me hope is even though we speak different languages sometimes, we communicate in different ways about certain environmental issues or, be it world issues or anything, even personal issues, there seems to be this mutual understanding of the situation deep down. Maybe they can't express it in words, but I do sense that everyone has this same kind of direction. They know there's a drive for them to move in that same kind of direction, which is a better world. And also not just at that vague level, but in a more specific level. People talk about nature and cities. They do know the inherent benefits of it. People talk about gardening, or people talk about protecting certain types of biodiversity, or even just, design as well. Architects seem to understand the power of social collaboration, and biodiversity experts and stormwater managers speak the same language, that there's multiple functions that nature can give. And even though it's not expressed in words at times, I do sense at a deeper level we are kind of aligned, and that I think gives me hope.
Good.
Having produced 35 episodes, meaning 35 interviews with 35 incredible guests, Darcy Molnar from episode 27 asked me a question that allowed me to think back on the journey and where I have arrived at.
No, I guess for me, it's really interesting. It would be interesting to know, what are you getting out of this podcast series? Now, you've had quite a few. And so, if you reflect back, your original idea from the beginning and now where you're at now, what have you gotten out of it? Or maybe what has surprised you? What you found out through the podcasts?
No, very cool question. I think the first thing I can start with, which I can definitely say has not changed, are the nerves that you get before an interview with a guest. No matter how well you know the person, you are bound to butcher things. So listeners, for any of you who ever want to start a podcast, I can tell you this is a feeling you need to embrace, and you need to trust. Trust in the process, trust that the nerves will disappear after a while, and that, it doesn't change whoever you interview. I guess the guests that are much more famous have done a lot more media, have spoken on a lot more podcasts, just know their work from the inside out, and perhaps on a topic that you're not as familiar with, those can be a bit more challenging, but definitely still always a feeling that you get no matter how long you've been doing it for. To come back to Darcy's actual question, I guess reflecting on it, when you think from the first episode up to the 35th, in the first episode, I was still testing the waters, still unsure if the format would work, and that becomes a bit easier as you progress through the production process because you start to learn the methods, you start to understand your own workflow to optimize it as you go. So I certainly have enjoyed improving my skills in that domain, as well as the interview skills, being able to catch on to interesting topics and to be able to focus the conversation in ways that, I guess, tell the story. Same goes for the editing, same goes for the production. But I think one of the most important things, which I can definitely say that I'm getting out of it, is the initial enjoyment and euphoria that I felt many years back when I did my semi-structured interviews, which inspired this podcast in the first place. That human connection. I feel like I'm connecting with my guests on a very different level. Doesn't matter how long I've known them for, but I can sense that chemistry that you build up through the process of the show. And to this day, I keep close contact with many of my guests. I am closer to them than ever before, and this is something I am incredibly grateful for. And it's one of the reasons why I keep striving to produce this podcast, not just because it produces incredible stories of inspiring people for many to listen to, but it also builds stronger relationships between me and my guests, and that these last for a long time. And with that, we wrap up the first half of this episode. Questions focused on the podcast, its origin story, the inspiration that I had back in the day and that I still continue on now as I produce more episodes of the show. And I guess reasons behind why the show exists in the way it does. So let's move on to the questions that are more general about me, about my life. And I thought to start off, we would start with a question that is a bit of a character quirk that I have, which relates to languages.
I have a good question.
Okay. Bring it on.
Maybe that's also a question for a beer afterwards. Peter, since we met, we always speak in English, but actually, we could also talk in German. Why don't we do it?
Yeah, that's true. I guess, English is my mother tongue. And I do speak German as well, and I'm fluent in German, but I don't know, for whatever reason, I just default to English. Maybe because it was the context that we met in, and we were working with others who didn't speak German as well. I don't know. Very funny.
No, but for me, it's just really funny because I would also, let's say, knowing that you're speaking very German, but also, let's say, if we're texting, we are also texting in English. So in that sense, that's just a little bit so that it's so nice, because we're in Stuttgart, and we're talking English, which is nice. But that was just one of the issues.
It's a strange realization, isn't it? But that's definitely something to reflect on. That was Markus Vogel from episode 23. And yes, I do speak German fluently, but I have this penchant for speaking the language that I spoke to the person when I first met them and having a hard time switching that language. So if I meet you and we speak English from the get-go, then that is the language I always default to. If we meet and speak German for the first time, then that is the language I'll default to. I haven't tried it with French, but would be interesting to see how that might work out. Either way, Markus and I first worked together in English on a project, even though the project was in Switzerland. But since then, it's been hard for me to just switch. It's not impossible. I've done it, but it's just been hard. Funny quirk about me. Let's look at some questions about my career choices and whether they perhaps have been the best choices. Here's Danielle Dagenet from episode 21.
Your first degree was in engineering?
Yeah.
Why did you choose to study engineering in the first place?
It's interesting to see how I got to engineering, because I guess what I've always been interested in is not just understanding the science. It's also been about applying it. I think growing up as a kid, what I loved to do was play SimCity. And it was a lot about managing different aspects of a city. I think I always got frustrated because my bank account kept going down and down and down, at least in the later games when it got a bit harder. But Yeah, I don't know. I played with Lego. I played with SimCity. There was always this interest in our environment, our urban environment, and solving problems. And when it came to deciding initially, I was very interested in music and psychology, actually, but knew from many copious and interesting discussions with my parents, especially my dad, that that was not going to be a long-term sustainable choice. I ended up going for engineering. I think the advantage that I knew I was fairly good at maths, at numbers, at analytical thinking. I felt, okay, why not? Medicine was out of the question. I was scared of blood. And I think I still cringe when I go for a blood test. But yeah, so this was kind of what I settled on. The decision to then go for civil. In Australia, you get a 1-year general, and I was able to observe. And I think the decision to go for civil really came from, again, that love of, my growing up building cities, building these kinds of environments. And that's, I guess the rest is history from there. So, it's an interesting reflective piece, but I'm glad because I think what I learned a lot more from it is how to think like an engineer, how to think analytically, and then also how to see how other people think, to be able to analyze their styles, whether it's a social scientist or a natural scientist or, practitioners as well. So.
Okay.
Even though I studied civil engineering in the end as my bachelor for 4 years, I didn't actually go into practice. I stayed in academia and continued down the path of research. But nevertheless, I think the biggest gain from studying this was really learning the skills of problem solving. And engineers tend to do that a lot. Perhaps even the skill of, making simplifying assumptions to make the problem solvable in the first place. Nevertheless, Arya Arab Shahi from episode 6 asked me a similar question, to which I gave a similar and expanded answer as well. And he also touched upon a topic that we spoke about, which was if humanity had to leave Earth on a spaceship, then what would my role actually be? Have a listen.
I'm so happy that I'm now on this side of the table. So, Peter, during our conversations in the past week, there was a moment that I thought this is the question I should ask Peter. And that was, if you could rewind time and go back to where you were choosing your major before you enter your bachelor's, what different choices would you have made in the specializations that you could have had?
Whoa. First of all, I have to do the rewinding process. If I could rewind time, go back and choose my major. So I guess a bit of background from my side. So I had so many different interests growing up, and I wasn't sure what to go for in the end. And the ideas were all different. I enjoyed science in school, so I thought maybe I'll become a scientist. I thought of music. I enjoyed music. I played the piano for quite some time, so I thought maybe I might do something there. But I always had this technical inspiration to do something with a certain technical aspect. And so, if you go at it from the science direction, it would have been the engineering. If it was from the music direction, maybe music, audio engineering or music production. At some point, I think psychology was also part of the mix. But I think in the end, architecture and engineering were two areas that I was always interested in because I played with Lego when I was growing up. I always enjoyed drawing plans of cities or houses or anything related to that. And I think it naturally went in that direction. I guess if I could go back to choosing, and maybe in today's world, I might have maybe done more to learn and enhance my drawing skills, because in a previous episode I mentioned I can't draw to save my life. But I would have probably pursued something that would have given me the ability to expose myself to different disciplines from the get-go. I think I wouldn't have necessarily changed from the engineering discipline, but I may have been more careful in or more meticulous in choosing a multitude or choosing a degree or choosing a form of study that exposed me to the multitude of ways of thinking from the get-go.
With that ambiguous answer, I'm going to now push forward in time and put you in that spaceship. So what can you do for us in this spaceship, Peter?
Oh, if I make it to the spaceship in the first place. But I think I would say that I would have the ability to connect the dots of different styles of thinking and to be able to bring this connection down to something tangible, an output that is tangible. So if it's the engineer maintaining the engines plus the kitchen hand maybe, preparing food in the kitchen, and how we can combine what they're doing to, make the operation or make the life on board of the spaceship more efficient or more practical in a way. And I think I enjoy that, the ability to connect the different dots together and to be able to connect the different disciplines together, which is also why I enjoy doing this podcast and having so many different guests from a diverse background on the show.
Super. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. This question was in fact asked 3 times in 3 different variations, roughly 3 months apart at a time, even though it doesn't seem that way with the episode numbers, but I do get the recordings ahead of time and I try to plan them into the suitable slots. Here's Belinda Hatt from episode 20 with a variant of this question.
All right, so Peter, you've asked me lots of questions over the last hour or so now it's time for me to turn the spotlight on you. If you hadn't studied engineering, what would you have done?
In a way, this is a bit similar to one of the questions I've gotten, but I do have a very different answer. I guess originally, when I was deciding what to study for university, I was actually debating a double degree between psychology and audio engineering, because I grew up playing the piano and music has been a very important part of my life. And I always thought, if I could take that further. And psychology came in because, in a way, I had done some of the natural sciences, but I didn't have a chance to do psychology in high school. So there was always this interest there. And I think I had some books on psychology that I was reading. But I think ultimately in the end, it would have been too much of a pity, given that I supposedly, this was not my own personal judgment of myself, but others, I supposedly had some good math skills. And I loved the idea of, building things. As a kid, I played a lot with Lego, and now recently I started picking it up again. Yeah, and engineering seemed like those kinds of disciplines that not only teaches you some very technical things, but it also teaches you a style of thinking that is unique, but also incredibly helpful in problem solving, which I guess is what I seem to spend my days doing in life in general as well. So I think if I didn't study engineering, or if, let's say, the discipline didn't exist in this world, I think those might have been the options. If I had been any better at drawing, then perhaps architecture. And there's numerous episodes where I think I've already lamented the fact that if I could draw, I might have also been an architect at the same time. It's interesting when you listen back on the 3 different answers you gave to the virtually same question, how similar things or how similar trends emerge. And at the same time, something new always gets added to each of these answers. But nevertheless, I hope from these 3 questions, you've kind of learned why I chose to do engineering instead of all the other options that were available to me. And what I would have done in an alternate dimension or in another world or another life. So with that out of the way, let's move into more, reflective life questions that also relate to my journey throughout life. As some of you may have learned from the episodes, I was born in Singapore. I lived there for 16 years. Then I moved to Malaysia to finish off high school. Then did my bachelor's and PhD in engineering in Australia and Melbourne, and stayed there for a few more years. In 2017, I came to Switzerland, where I am based now. And the rest is history. So let's hear from Juan Pablo Rodriguez Sanchez from episode 15.
Well, Peter, now is my turn to interview you. I'm very curious. Well, as I told you, when I was younger, I didn't have much opportunity to travel across the world. Now that I'm researching, I have the opportunity to go to many places, which is fascinating. But I know that you're born in Singapore, that you live in Malaysia, that you live in Australia. Now you are living in Switzerland. And whoever knows, perhaps you will be living in other place. You never know. Can you give me a word or two or a very short sentence of what each of those places makes you the person you are now?
Wow, that's deep. Yeah, I guess I've moved around a bit in my life, and I think every place has shaped me in a certain way. I think growing up in Singapore was, I felt that protective cage, allowing you to experiment and learn things in life. As a kid, as you grow up, I would spend some days going down to the playground, or other days hang out with friends, or being at home and learning how to use a computer, because it was the thing to do at the time. But I think Singapore gave me that fairly, protective mindset that I think was good, in growing up, in developing your personal self and seeing what the world is like. And I think, now that I'm reflecting on that, it's probably not so much the individual countries that shaped me, but it was the movement between them. And I think this is where it becomes easier for me to answer that question. I think moving from Singapore to Malaysia, my first move after having lived somewhere for 16 years, you really feel that dread, but you learn to understand that change is inevitable. Change happens and you learn to accept it. And the first time is the hardest, but after that, it gets a bit easier. I think then, Malaysia, I finished my high school and then I moved from there to Australia to do university. I think, again, that move from Malaysia to Australia, it was leaving my parents and really becoming independent. And it was, again, that kind of dread and excitement at the same time, because you're like, wow, this is a complete change. And then if I had to think of the move between Australia and Switzerland, I think it's one of the moments in my life where I really learned that there's always timing. You have to just be patient, and there's a reason for the timing. Things work out in the end. And it was really this very interesting, people who know me will sort of know what I mean, but I guess if I had to put it in a way that listeners could understand, it was a lot of uncertainty about my academic future and opportunities from, both sides. I got a research grant in Australia, and at the same time I got an offer to join ETH in Zurich. And it was really this, let life lead you, let life guide you. Like you said in your episode, let your heart guide you as well. And if you stop thinking about timing or, stop worrying about the uncertainty, things just fall in place. And so I think that move really defined that moment in my life. And so, now I'm in Switzerland, and who knows where the future takes me. I guess the plan is to try and settle in Switzerland. And now I'm, I'm happy and looking forward to seeing what kinds of exciting research projects I can embark on next.
Great. My best wishes to your future.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Each of these places have a special meaning in my life and my heart. But Françoise Bichat from episode 32 takes this question a step further.
So I guess we both have mixed origins and we both have lived in different places in the world. And I was wondering if there was one special place for you where you feel most comfortable or, feel your best.
To use a silly quote, home is where the heart is, I guess. I think over the years, moving different places, I've become, more used to change, to changing places, to adapting to my own city. And I think, I think home is where I enjoy being with the people I love. And at the moment, it's wherever my wife is, I am there. And so I feel much more at ease. But I think apart from the obvious, I think what's also important, or what I noticed from thinking about this question, is I enjoy the years I've spent in different places and I look back to them fondly. And in a way, the simple answer would be every place has been really nice. And that's because I think you were there for a certain period of time in your life, and then you left that place and it served its purpose in, teaching you and exposing you to the life there rather than the life that could have been.
Okay, nice.
One thing that stuck with me over the last few years is my love for Switzerland. And Fritz Kleinschrodt, episode 18, has another question for me here.
You said to me before, I think, that you want to stay in Switzerland, that you want to live in Switzerland. Why?
Ooh, fascinating question. Makes me also reflect a lot. I think, in a way, one of the biggest reasons is I feel like I've been moving from place to place so far. I grew up in Singapore. I lived in Malaysia to finish school. I came to Melbourne to do a lot of my university studies, my PhD, and I lived there for 11 years. And at some point, I felt, Switzerland was a huge opportunity for me. And I had grown closer to Europe over the time, especially during my PhD when I had the chance to go to Europe. Because for most of the time when I was in Australia, I didn't have the chance because it's just so far to travel. But through research, we get the opportunities to travel. And Europe grew closer to me, just the lifestyle. And when I moved to Switzerland, it was a chance to then embrace that. But also after some time, you sort of realize you want to lay down roots. You want to lay down your foundations. And now more than before, in a way, now that I'm married as well, my wife and I, we both do love the country. We love the way how we feel about it, the freedom we have and just the beautiful nature of the country. And also just the practicality of it. You can travel around anywhere in Europe from Switzerland that, I feel like, this is where you want to settle, where you want to stay for, as long as you can. Who knows what life will throw at you, but in a way you feel comfortable making that decision. And I think you will notice, or life will give you hints when it's time to make that decision. at least for the foreseeable future. You know, that's one of the biggest reasons. I think the second one was also just there's value in starting over. And in a way, a fresh start always helps you gain new ideas, learn new lessons, and build yourself as a character. But I feel I've done that a lot, you know, and never had the chance to really finish off some of my, you know, previous experiences or previous tasks. I guess Switzerland came as a sudden thing while I was in Australia, and I happily took that. But I felt like there's many loose ends that I want to tie up, and I feel like I can do that, and I can still start afresh without having to leave the country. So I think there's really these two things at play. And it's this, you know, you call it a convenience, but I think call it also just a fondness that you have found for the lifestyle that you've spent years, in a way, warming up to. I guess the irony is always, when I was growing up, I somehow liked Asia a lot, and Europe was always something special, but I never saw myself living there. Even when it came to deciding when to go to university, I actually chose Australia over Europe. But yeah, I guess it took me a while to warm up to the European lifestyle and the Swiss lifestyle that I'm now in. So I guess it's a fascinating reflection. So thanks for the question. Abhishek asked me 3 questions. Here is the second one.
What is the worst advice you've ever received?
Wow. What is the worst advice I've ever received? I mean, I can think of worst, or at least the most useless or uninformed advice, but I literally cannot think of it at the top of my head. When I ask someone for advice, then I would like to hear something that allows me to act upon it. I believe that it's important to act upon the advice that is given to you. But when you get tips like be patient, or there's a silver lining in any experience that you have, no matter how bad it is, things will work out, good things will come, then it's not exactly advice you can act on immediately, or at least it doesn't have tangible things that you can actually take action on. And so I guess no advice is bad. I think every advice has a lot of positives. But if I had to answer this question, which completely stumped me at the time, and after 2 years of reflection, I think it would be those kinds of statements, because it's very true and they're very helpful. And I've heard it many times in my life. But when there's nothing specific in there for you to take action on, then you're back to square one, where you have to do some introspection to really think about how you tick, how you can act in your own way on the advice. And so, yeah, I guess maybe it's we're all inclined to wanting to hear things that allow us to act upon, to make things simple. But this is often, whilst the most powerful, also the most frustrating to hear, especially because I know that I can be a pretty impatient person. So something that I'm working on in the years to come as well. Daniele La Cecilia from episode 10 had a similar question. So how does it feel to be a host now, Daniele?
I feel very confident in this position.
All right. Well, give me your best shot.
I mentioned as a tip for future generations, like endure pain with patience. Have you ever had painful experiences?
I certainly had. And I can relate a lot to that statement. I think in my career to date, I've been through quite a few moments where you know, for whatever reason, oftentimes either it's, you know, your research findings or the speed at which research is going, or it's really just when you face the uncertainty of where you're going to be, whether it's job-wise or whether it's just generally in your life. And I've always been asked or guided to, you know, practice patience. In one of my previous episodes with Abhishek, we discussed the idea of mindfulness and meditation. And I find that when I'm in that kind of state, the endurance, in a way, can be helped through these kinds of practices. And when I face these situations, or when I'm put in these kinds of positions, I guess I just have to tell myself, okay, be patient and do what you can to practice that patience. Because I think looking back at these moments in my life, I kind of reflect upon them fondly. And I say, hey, if I was never there, I wouldn't be here where I am today, making this podcast. So yeah, I guess my advice as well to everyone, I think, you know, it definitely works. Practice patience, endure the pain, you know, feel it. And I think things will get better from there. And it makes you stronger day by day.
Thank you, Peter. I guess this answer is worth 1 million questions.
Oh, geez.
Because we often say and we show that everything is fine, but it's also good to share these moments with the right people, maybe.
vulnerability should not be seen as a weakness. I think it's a moment of honesty and a moment of, I guess, oftentimes your authentic self comes out and then you're not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And it's a moment of bonding as well because you built that interrelationship with a person.
Yeah. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Being able to feature my own PhD supervisor on the show, Anna Deletic, from episode 9, was a very big moment for me. And I'm still trying to get a lot of my longtime mentors on the show, but we've been able to get a few so far. And this is what Anna asked me.
Okay, my question to you, what does make you happy?
What makes me happy? Whoa, that's a very broad question. Can we make it specific or am I not allowed to?
What does make you happy in your work life?
I think knowing that when I do work that I think can solve a particular issue that I feel needs to be solved, and to find ways to get the industry or to get practice to adopt it, to be able to use it in a way that improves their lives, whether it's improving the lives of the people or improving the lives of nature. I think that's why I've ventured into the more multifunctional, broader disciplines in the last few years, especially because I think water management is one thing and it's essential, but I think we can do so much more with it. And when we leverage the power of that to make cities more beautiful and people just feeling appreciative of nature, I think then bringing the people on board, building that awareness to the challenges our world faces, I think is so satisfying to see.
Good, nice.
Yeah.
I taught you well.
Yeah, well, glad to hear.
Making impact rather than just, nice.
Yeah.
Good.
You've done more than taught me well, Anna. I have learned so much from you, so I am endlessly grateful for your tutelage, for your tips, for your advice, and for being able to start my research journey with you, and looking forward to a part 2 one day. A funny thing that happened during the Q&A session with my guests was that at some point they had to ask me my own questions back to me. So here are my answers to some of the questions I asked all my guests. Let's start with Anna Linton from episode 19.
I noticed that nobody else was throwing your own questions back at you. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you use it for?
Throwing my own question back at me. The magic wand question is actually surprisingly difficult to answer, even though my guests had time to prepare for this. I actually gave them the protocol well in advance with these questions. But if I had to answer it myself, I guess 2 things come to mind, and they both relate. And that is that we need more collaboration in this world. We need less competition, more transparency, less games that people play with each other, and just more openness and willingness to embrace other ways of thinking, or at least to listen. I think some of the biggest achievements in my career to date, some of the best moments have come from mutual collaboration, from a lot of fun working together with people who are just as open-minded, and from learning from each other. And we don't see this enough in this world. The fast-paced nature of our world, our careers, just thinking academia as an example, where it's publish or perish, these kinds of mindsets, they're not helping us make the breakthroughs that we need to tackle the many grand challenges that we face. And there's tons of them. We've spoken about them on the show, be it climate change, be it rapid urbanization, population growth, the rise of artificial intelligence, and how that's going to affect our lives in the coming decades. So if I had a magic wand, I guess on the one hand, it's waving it to create a world where people are just more open to collaboration, open to learning from each other, much more than the polarization we're seeing now. And on the other hand, I guess it's to slow down things to a pace where we have the time to really think through deeply how to solve the problems that we are trying to tackle in ways that are efficient. And whilst reality may not necessarily reflect this, and I think we do need to progress at a pace that is sustainable, given the urgency of many challenges, I still think there's value in just taking a step back, taking a pause, and reflecting on what we already know and where we can go from there together. And so one of the final questions I ask my guests was also thrown back at me by none other than Martijn Koller.
So the question that I actually wanted to ask is, if you had any advice for young people, what would it be?
No, that's a very, very good question.
Because you make it very hard on us as podcastees. So now I think we should make it hard on you as a podcaster.
No, that's a good question. The protocol says I don't have to answer it now.
You can take your time. We didn't have this time, by the way, for the listeners. We didn't have time to think about it.
You had the 3-4 weeks of prep.
That's true.
But in your case, you had 3 months of prep before I released yours. Others have only a week.
That's true.
In some cases, 2 weeks. It sounds a bit like cheating when I say I don't have to answer it at the time, but I did tell my guests I would record my response or I would record the answer. So in all the questions you've heard today, you would have heard my immediate response, whereas other questions I felt I wanted to take more time to think about before delivering a response so that I feel you can really gain some nuggets of wisdom here. As for advice for young people, there's really 5 big points I can offer. If I had to sum it up, some of it has come from the inspiration I gained from the 35 episodes and others from my own life experience. And so let's go into them. Number 1, follow your passion. I think we've heard that many times on the show, and we've seen evidence that that leads to really beautiful outcomes. I think it's important to follow your passion and also to share your passion with the world. You don't need to worry about the haters, about what people think. If you believe in it yourself, then it makes things easier. It's never an easy road if you try to follow it, but if you know that you're doing things that you love, then it just makes the going easier, particularly in tough times. So find your why, follow it, and you'll see life unfold in front of you. I guess the second advice relates to that, and that is find your path. We've had examples on the show, such as John Hathaway from episode 24, who talks about the nonlinear path, or Bill Hunt from episode 33, who talks about the Camino, the journey. It's never linear, but you have to walk it. If you think about a forest, a dark forest, if you walk into the forest, you won't see the whole path through the forest, but you need to go along the road. You have to progress along it a bit to see where it leads. You don't have a map. And if you did, life would be boring anyways. So I think you need to try, you need to dare to walk along that path. And if you see that that path doesn't lead in the direction that you're hoping it does, then you can always backtrack and choose another path. But as Luis Sanudo on episode 32 said, take the path less traveled. It's always going to be the more interesting, challenging, but definitely the more interesting. Number 3, I would say reflect often. With gratitude. Even if the going gets tough, I feel we don't do it enough. And it doesn't sound like it might be effective from the get-go, but having done it myself many times in the past, I can definitely tell you that it puts you in a better mindset. It makes you appreciate what you have, and it allows you to see the silver lining in many tough times that you may have gone through in your life. I think there's always a silver lining, and it takes time for you to understand the reason behind many things that have happened in your life. But in order to get to that point, and maybe quicker, in fact, I think it's important to reflect often and to bring gratitude to that practice in the process. Number 4 is more on the career side, and it's something I consciously did when I embarked on my research career, and that is to diversify your skills. I think there's magic in combining the skills you gain through time together and bringing it to your main passion in your career. As a researcher, I enjoyed looking up information, synthesizing new knowledge, and creating things out of it. But I think what brought a lot of joy to my work were skills that I learned in programming, in presentation, graphic design, communication. And if you can find ways to bring these different skills to your work, then it makes your work, the main work that you do, a whole lot more fun. And one way to see it is in your life, you progress along different parallel tracks with your skills. Maybe at the start, it doesn't seem like these skills will merge eventually, but I feel that if you keep going and you keep diversifying your portfolio of what you do, how you do it, and the kind of creativity that you bring to your work, you will eventually see that these parallel streams will start to merge. I'm certainly seeing that now as my career progresses, and it just brings a whole uniqueness to what you produce for the world. Finally, perhaps the most important and also the most powerful piece of advice I can offer, I would say never forget to care for yourself and your loved ones. Take time to show them how much you love them. You may not realize it at the time, but they are always there for you and will be there for you even in the darkest moments. And if you need to pull yourself out, sometimes it can be done by yourself. But most of the time, you'll see that because these people are there for you and they're there to support you, it makes things a lot easier, a lot quicker, and also a lot more powerful. So don't forget them, make them your highest priority, and take some time out to show them how much you care. If there's a take-home message I can give you for the holiday period that's coming up, I would say take some time to reflect on the year. I do this twice a year, on the day before my birthday and the day before New Year. I sit down and I just try to replay what has happened in the past 12 months and just try to think about the key moments, some of the key events, what I've gone through, what I've learned from them, and how I can use them to better myself every single day, especially in the year to come. So take some time and reflect on it. You'll see that it will fill you with, I guess, lots of excitement, lots of happiness, lots of gratitude, and also maybe lots of dread, who knows? But at least you know you got through it, you're still here, and you're ready to take on the next year with even more energy. So definitely do that. I can highly recommend it. I do it myself, and you'll get to see what happens in the next 12 months. So that wraps up our first special episode, 21 questions from guests across the entire show. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of this kind of episode. It's the first time I've done a special episode for the podcast, but I felt it was something that allowed me to reflect on my journey as well, having produced 35 episodes. It takes quite a bit of time and effort to plan and to get the guests and to really produce something that I am incredibly proud of, and I hope that you also enjoyed this journey so far. I have a lot planned in the coming year for the podcast, and I'll be sharing that with you in due course, but do let me know what you think of this format. And if you want to support the show, I would be incredibly grateful. There are many ways you can do that. The easiest one would be to leave a 5-star rating or review of the show on your favorite platform, be it Spotify or Apple Music. It will help the show grow tremendously. It will help the show reach many more ears and will allow me to get more incredible guests on the show as well. There's also a LinkedIn group. I plan to engage with that group even more in the next year. We've been posting trailers for different episodes on there, as well as my YouTube channel. So if you're not sure which episode to listen to next, you can check out that group or my YouTube channel to see what episodes might pique your interest. Otherwise, I hope that you have a happy festive season, and we will return in the next year with brand new episodes and brand new guests who will be sharing their incredible stories with you. So until then, I wish you all a beautiful end of the year, and thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you in the next year. Well, that wraps up our first installment of Tables Turned on the Grand Challenges podcast. I hope that this episode got you curious about the many guests we have had so far on the show, or that you have at least learned a bit more about me and the podcast's origin story. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be incredibly grateful if you could leave a like, follow, subscribe, share, or review the show on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you're listening from. Your support means a lot to me and will allow us to grow this podcast to a broader audience. Through this, the many inspiring stories by our guests can reach many more ears. If you're curious about me or my work in general, you can also visit my website or follow me on social media. Head to petermbach.com, my YouTube channel, Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or follow me on X at Peter M. Bach or Instagram at PeterMBach87. Feel free to get in touch with any feedback or guest suggestions so that I can keep improving this show. This special episode's intro and outro song is called Astral Dance by Jimit. The podcast will return in 2025 with new episodes and new guests who are tackling the grand challenges.